What if I told you that the word man, just like the word person, is the result of a long historical and cultural tradition, that these words conceal a specific metaphysical connotation? And what if these very definitions were preventing us from truly understanding who we are? So, how can we attempt to understand what it means to be a human being without prejudicing its essence? In a text written before his seminal work, Being and Time, Heidegger addresses exactly this problem. His primary aim is to try to answer a deeply philosophical question, which is, who is a man? But in the attempt to answer this question, Heidegger realizes two important things. The first is that this question cannot be posed in a neutral way. Inevitably, through the use of our language, we are always already situated within a historical cultural tradition. For this reason, a new approach is needed, one that allows access to the essence of things. The second important point that he understands is that this question, what is a human being, is a profoundly philosophical question. Therefore, it is first necessary to understand what philosophy is and what it is its role in connection to human beings. Here too, Heidegger deconstructs the common concept of philosophy, understood as an academic discipline or set of theories, seeking instead to recover its meaning starting from its relationship with life. In this video, we will follow Heidegger's thought in an attempt to answer two important questions: who is a man and what is philosophy? But in order to undertake this investigation, we must first introduce a new method: phenomenology. The method Heidegger adopts in formulating the problem is phenomenological. So let us first clarify what phenomenology is, and then see how Heidegger attempts to go beyond his teacher and the founder of phenomenology, Edmund Husserl, thanks also to the so-called philosophy of life of the philosopher Dilthey. Husserlian phenomenology, understood as rigorous science, aims to go directly to the essence of the things, that is, to begin from the phenomenon, what we observe and what appears before us. In order to access the phenomenon, we must abstain from all types of prejudice or preconceptions, including theoretical scientific ones. This pre-theoretical stage, free from any form of bias, is called by Husserl the life word, or in German Lebenswelt. To access the life word, it is necessary to adopt a specific mode of relating to things, which Husserl calls epoche. This is a suspension of judgment, especially with respect to the objective sciences. Husserl writes, an epoche is needed from all assumption of the notions of objective sciences, an epoche from any critical stance regarding the truth or falsity of a science, even from its guiding idea, the idea of an objective knowledge of the world. In short, we perform an epoche with respect to all theoretical interests and goals we assume and pursue as scientists or even just as curious individuals. Husserl tries to explain that in natural sciences such as physics, biology, or others, the world is treated as an object separated from subject who observes it. This creates a problematic subject-object relationship because it takes for granted the existence of an external world without reflecting on how that world appears to us. Epoche, or the suspension of judgment, clears the ground of the typical scientific objectivation, and thus suspends the subject-object relationship with the world. It shifts attention from external object to the phenomenon as it appears in consciousness, as lived experience. Through what Husserl calls essential intuition, we can directly grasp the essence of an experience with our own consciousness. But be careful. The primary or naive intention toward these experiences is not sufficient. It does not analyze them. Therefore, what is needed is what Husserl calls phenomenological reflection, an intentional act of consciousness that turns toward its own experiences, thematizes them, and seeks their essence. This is where Heidegger's fundamental break occurs. According to him, reflection devitalizes the lived experiences, once again abstracting man from life. Reflection, in fact, is an abstract and theoretical operation that risks reducing life to an object of study, thus losing its immediacy, pathos, and concrete reality. For this reason, Heidegger tries to preserve phenomenological intuition by separating it from the Husserlian reflection. Intuition must not objectify the lived experience, but must remain within it, understanding it from the inside as it is being lived. Heidegger writes, phenomenological intuition does not interrupt the original, pre-theoretical intention of life, nor does it result in a reflective objectification of lived experiences. Rather, it consists in living the lived experience, grasping it and carrying it along with itself. In this sense, for Heidegger, it becomes possible, on the basis of a phenomenological intuition, to understand lived experience from within its motivations, rather than distancing it in a devitalizing theoretical process. To go beyond Husserl, Heidegger draws on a new philosophical currents. In the late 19th and 20th centuries, thinkers like Dilthey, Bergson, and Simmel proposed placing life at the center of philosophical reflection, in a contrast to scientific, rationalistic, and systematic visions. These movements were not mere intellectual trends, but rather renewed awareness of the essential bond between philosophy and life. Heidegger acknowledges their importance, even if he ultimately surpasses them. Speaking of philosophy of life does not mean reducing life to an object. Instead, it means resituating philosophy within the context of life, which is the starting point of all human experience, the only real ground for philosophizing. In this sense, philosophy is not something external or abstract, but must be understood in terms of life itself. Thus, philosophy becomes a constant repetition, understood as the recovery of life from the decay into which it tends to fall. Philosophy preserves life, keeps life alive. This is why philosophy's task, in contrast to other sciences, is more complex. Sciences have clearly defined objects. Biology studies life, for example, or physics studies matter. The sciences inherit a pre-made field of research. Philosophy, on the other hand, does not have a given object. It must constantly ask itself anew what its own object is, namely the meaning of being. It must project its own field from scratch and take a position about being, thus assigning meaning to things. Heidegger writes, if there were, in philosophy too, a clearly visible region with the well-defined boundaries, then there could be no erratic wandering or continual research for the authentic region. That which philosophy as a cognitive behavior directs itself toward must therefore be continually projected anew and reached anew, requiring exploration in multiple directions. To achieve a genuine definition of philosophy, we must first clear away the obstacles of how it is commonly understood. There are two fundamental errors that typically characterize how philosophy is defined: overestimation and underestimation. Both are important because behind them lies a genuine intention aimed at the meaning of philosophy and how it can be appropriated. But this authentic intention is corrupted and thus leads to misjudgment. In both cases, there is a dual error, but at the foundation of both lies a single great misunderstanding. The first error is what Heidegger calls overestimation. Here, he criticizes the rationalist or metaphysical approach, the attempt to find the most general possible definition of philosophy, one that could encompass all other definitions. In other words, it seeks the pure essence of philosophy, as if it were a logical and abstract structure. But there is also a positive intention, the search for foundations. The problem is that it falls into error by defining philosophy in a purely theoretical way, without asking why and what this act of defining implies. Thus, the vital importance of philosophy, its concrete nature, is neglected. The second error Heidegger calls underestimation. Here too, there is a positive intention, attention to the concrete. But the error is the opposite of the first. In seeking the concrete, philosophy is reduced to a tool instead of being seen as what makes understanding itself possible. Science becomes the model, whose continuous progress is taken as evidence of truth. It is thus believed that because sciences function without a foundational principle, they can serve as models for philosophy. Philosophy is forced to adapt to science. inverting the foundational relationship that historically existed between them. From the nature of these two errors, one can deduce the hidden authentic intention underlying philosophy. First, philosophy is characterized by a grounding definition. It does not concern itself with a particular region of beings, like the sciences do, but with being as such, and thus must grasp the most universal aspects of reality. A clear example is the Kantian categorical imperative. If it applied only to a particular case, it would not be a philosophical principle. Secondly, it's essential to consider the concreteness of philosophy. The belief that philosophy concerns only with abstract issues is a deep misunderstanding. It is exactly the opposite. Life is the real ground from which philosophical questions arise. Heidegger writes, "The stable ground is something that must always first be matured, like appropriation, lies in grasping problematization, that is, in radical maturation of questioning." Let's pause for a moment to consider how Heidegger is working. He starts from the commonly held definition of philosophy, one overly abstract and general, the other one overly concrete. True, neither captures the essence of philosophy, but Heidegger does not just discard them. He examines them and realizes that behind the errors lies something true, the desire to embrace the universal, being, and the need to be grounded in a concrete life. Now we reach a central point. Heidegger's insight arises thanks to the philosopher Paul Nathorp, a neo-Kantian from Marburg. Nathorp sought to ground scientific thought by rethinking Kant's transcendental philosophy. But late in life, he turned toward finding the absolute origin of thought, the principle of foundation. Heidegger adopts Nathorp's radical questioning, but subverts its direction. Instead of searching for an epistemic foundation, he seeks the original experience of being. Heidegger takes a linguistic shift and builds an ontological existential difference. Drawing from Nathorp's analysis, Heidegger distinguishes between the definitional question "what is," or in German "was ist," and the existential focus "that is," "das ist." The first follows metaphysics in asking what something is, to define its essence. The second reflects Heidegger's ontological discovery, not what something is, but that it is, that something exists rather than not existing. Heidegger calls this the wonder of wonders, that there is something and not nothing. Now, returning to our initial question, what is philosophy? The very way we pose the question reveals a bias. When we ask what something is, we immediately objectify it. This is a useful procedure in sciences, but becomes problematic for philosophy. Asking what philosophy is treats it like any other object. To rescue philosophy from this objectifying paradigm, we must reorientate the question. Not what is philosophy, but what is philosophizing. As Heidegger writes, what can be taught and learned is not philosophy, but philosophizing. By shifting the attention from the noun, which implies a fixed, defined object, to the verb, we emphasize the dynamic nature of the act of philosophizing. The second step is to explore philosophizing as an action. Heidegger here references Plato, who presents in many dialogues a dynamic and active view of philosophy. Heidegger reinterprets Plato, who says philosophy is a way of behaving. That is, philosophy is not content or a doctrine, but a stance, a way of relating to something. The German word Verhalten, behavior, is key here. It's not mechanical action, but a mode of relationship, and the nature of that relationship depends on what we are relating to. In philosophy, that object is being itself, not a particular region of beings like sciences, but being as such. So philosophy, like science, is a form of knowing, but in a unique way. In which way? The sense of being is both the most universal of all objects and thus foundational for other knowledge, and at the same time eludes definition. This leads to two consequences. First, we don't impose our way of knowing on being. It's exactly the opposite. The being itself demands a change in our attitude to grasp it. And second, being as principle is a formal indication. It tells us how to orientate ourselves without specifying what we will find. Heidegger is slowly deconstructing the metaphysical paradigm upon which Western civilization is founded. In restoring meaning to philosophy as a knowing behavior, he is shaping an alternative to the subject object paradigm. When we inquire into something, especially in philosophy, we are not subjects investigating or researching something, because, as Heidegger has explained, philosophy cannot be treated like an object. Above all, he shows that in questioning, in the act of knowing, what matters is not the one who investigates, but that which is being sought. The very nature of the question depends then on the object of our research. This means that what we seek is actually what determines us. That is why it's always fundamental to pose radical questions, because what is being involved in this process of questioning is actually our own existence. And since in philosophical questioning the object of the inquiry is the most important of all, the meaning of being, which underlies all things, then from this act of questioning we may obtain a clue about who the human being is in their highest sense. Thus, in this way, starting from the first question, Heidegger moves on to the second fundamental question: what is a man? It is now time to attempt to answer this question. But first, we must highlight the paradigm that still shapes the way we understand the human being. It's no coincidence that Heidegger rarely uses the word man in his writings. Instead, he constantly searches for alternatives that bring out the essence of human existence. For example, the German word Dasein in his Being and Time. The word man is not neutral. It carries with it centuries of metaphysical sedimentation, that is, ready-made views of what a human being is. In particular, there are two dominant perspectives that still prevail today. Man is a rational being, introduced by Aristotle and later developed in Roman and medieval culture. In this view, rationality is the distinctive trait that sets human apart from all other entities. The task of philosophy, then, is to explain and develop this trait. The second one is man as a person, which has its roots in Christianity. Here, the human being is created in the image of God, so his essence is given by theological relationship. He is a person because he has a soul, ontological dignity, and a transcendent destiny. Heidegger writes, in both conceptual determinations, the task is to establish the kind of equipment of a pre-given thing, to which, based on this equipment, a specific mode of being is subsequently assigned, or which is then indifferently abundant in real being. Heidegger here is denouncing an ontological error. We start from a concept, reason, soul, or person, and think of that human being as something that possesses certain attributes or equipment, as he calls them. Only afterward do we try to describe the mode of being of this thing in relation to a particular attribute. In both cases, the possibility of investigating the reality of the human being, his concrete being in relation to being, is blocked. We must instead start from the concrete reality of the human being and from there find the fundamental phenomenological categories of life. These categories, Heidegger writes, are not inventions or sets of logical frameworks in themselves, but are originally alive within life itself, alive in order to form life. The key word Heidegger identifies is care, in German Sorge. It's the original way in which the human being relates to the world. It is his ontological, not psychological, structure. This means that the very being of the human is care. There is no subject who then takes care, but man is the act of taking care. His relationship with the world is always involved, situated, concerned. There are three fundamental forms of care toward the world. The first one is one's own world. This is the world of my existential involvement, where I meet myself in the things I dedicate myself to, succeed at or fail in. It is my existential environment where I recognize myself. The second one is the collective world. This is the world of relations with others who also take care of things. It is the intersubjective dimension of existence. The third world is the environmental world. This includes all the things apart from man, the things with which man interacts, those he takes care of. They are not just there in mere presence. They come toward the human and in this encounter reveal a meaningfulness, which is the categorical character of objects. In this way, humans have experiences of objects by going out to meet them. There are also four categories of care as references to life. The first one is the inclination. In every interaction, there is always an inclination toward things, which have a peculiar gravity, an attraction toward humans. This means that the human being is not in the world as just another object, not as a mere presence. The human is an existence, an existere, an openness, and being inclined, available to encounter, to respond to a call. And the things do not sit indifferently in the world, but attract, call, draw the human. Hence, the possibility of distraction, the risk that human inclination becomes dispersion, loss of self. An example is the self-satisfaction, a form of care that falls into immediate pleasure, the comfort of distraction. The second one is the distance. Things are before the human, maintaining a certain distance, which allows inclination itself, giving the human mobility, a kind of tension toward the things. Inclination tends to erase this distance, dragging the human into distraction, being so taken by things that one no longer sees oneself. Since distance is inherent to the being of care, it cannot truly be erased, but on the level of life it turns into distraction. However, distance returns in the form of calculation, technical, conceptual distance, but no longer existential. The third one is closure, and this happens when there is no more distance between us and the things. This closure prevents us from grasping what lies before us, but also prevents us from understanding ourselves within our own world, because it is exactly in the encounter with the things that we also experience ourselves. Thus, from distraction, we move to losing the self. But in closure, there is a paradox. The more man loses himself, failing to appropriate distance, the more he in fact ends up dealing with himself. The fourth and last one is the ease. This is the carefree certainty, the easiest and the least decisive choice. As Aristotle explains in the Nicomachean Ethics, the right thing to do is always the hardest because it is only one, while the ways of going wrong are infinite. These infinite wrong paths are misleading, and thus the easiest path appears appealing. At the foundation of these four categories is a fundamental movement of life, decay or falling, in German verfallen. This represents the life's falling into itself, its constant exposure to loss, not as an accident, but as an original structure. In this sense, poverty, or privatio in Latin, is the heart of man's actual life. This poverty explains three conditions of the human being. The first one is his openness to the world because of his inner lack. The second one is his sensitivity because of his vulnerability. The third one is his being a philosopher because in the absence of meaning, he must seek it. When we understand that the constitutive character of life is its poverty, its lack, and that this lack represents the core of life's very movement, this allows us to understand the meaning of philosophy. Only through this understanding it is possible to redeem life from its essential loss. Philosophy, or rather philosophizing, is the movement that has the task of safeguarding and preserving life from its tendency toward decay. How? Through repetition. Heidegger writes, repetition, everything depends on the meaning of this word. Philosophy is a fundamental mode of life itself, such that it properly always repeats life, in the sense that it retakes it from the decay. This retaking, as radical inquiry, is itself life. Repetition is the means by which philosophy retrieves life from its decay. Philosophizing is the reappropriation of life as it decays, not through abstractions, but by living it. Recognizing life's constitutive decay and questioning it, this is where authentic thought is born. Thank you for watching this video. I'm Ivan and this is Empyreon, the Academy of Philosophy and Fine Arts.